Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Pat. I'm the host of the Dr. Pat Show, and I am the creator of the Transformation Network, doing what we do in the world of positive radio, informed, educated, positive media. Independent radio hosts and independent networks have been the face of positive messaging over the past decade. So all of us here have decided we're going to put together an independent network that is going to enable people to bring their positive message of hope, inspiration, and conscious action to the forefront.
Welcome to InflexionPoint Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello to our audience, and thank you very much for tuning into the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast. We invite you into a space for critical reflection, education, and resistance at the point where personal conscience meets collective responsibility. Our show was really born out of what was initially called the Cairo question. And I'm going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that Cairo question a little bit later in this episode, but the show now lives in Reimagine We. And I see that as an ongoing practice of reimagining how we think, how we relate, and how we build in a world that demands more than just hope. So I'm your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter.
Excellent. So our 2026 theme, as I mentioned, is Reimagine We begins with Reimagine Me. And so what I'd like to start off with is the preamble to the Reimagine We Declaration of Engagement. We live in a world built on extraction, not relationship. It was designed to consume people, land, labor, and spirit in the name of profit, power, and dominance. It taught us competition instead of cooperation. It told us that our worth is measured by productivity, that our humanity is conditional. We reject the principles of extraction and embrace the principles of cooperation, relationship, and collaboration. Understanding and addressing one another's needs, effective communication, and conflict resolution are essential for building strong collaboration. So we begin this conversation with a continuation of the significance of the Kwanzaa principles. In our last episode, we started digging really deep into these Kwanzaa principles and looking at them as more than just a year-end celebration. Here, the principles are defined as a blueprint for collective liberation and revisiting the Cairo question. So as I mentioned, our theme is Reimagine We begins with Reimagine Me. So I'm going to break that down a little bit before we get into our discussion. Reimagine We is what happens when a question about survival becomes a commitment to personal empowerment and transformation. I see it as a three-way intersection of personal empowerment, community engagement, and cooperative economics. And all three are essential for transforming individuals from passive participants in economic system based on capitalism to active creators, co-creators of collective agency. So Reimagine Me is about personal empowerment, preparing individuals to engage meaningfully in cooperative economic structures. So cooperative economics provides the platform to sustain and multiply that empowerment in community-centered democratic ways. So one without the other is limited, but together they create a powerful engine for social, economic, and cultural transformation. So it's about a shift from individualism to collective agency. It's breaking that dependency on extractive systems. It's values-driven participation, it's education and skill development, sustainability, and resilience. So having said all of that, Mavis and Gail, how do you see Reimagine We, beginning with Reimagine Me?
Well, I'll go. I mean, I think that concept I've always lived by, and working with people individually and in groups, that it almost has to happen. We can't reimagine we without reimagining me. And that means I have to do the work within myself in order to make changes that I believe in need to be changed about myself. And then also collectively, then we come together and collectively do that. So I think it's a very empowering way of looking at choices and how to live in this life differently.
Absolutely. Mavis?
Well, there's a lot of work to be done. That's what I keep thinking. When we were talking about the Cairo question earlier, I don't know if you're going to go into that further, but that he will more than likely have to deal with discrimination throughout his life because of the color of his skin. And that is such a loss of hope for me. But I read this interview of Dr. Robert Livingston of Angela Davis, and she says something so poignant that it kind of reset me just quickly. He asked her, "How do you not despair?" And she says, you've got to reframe that question, because I've never been involved in undertaking anything that hasn't been collective.
Mm-hmm.
So she views herself as a collective. And that's the thing I know I have to work on as an individual. And I would think a lot of people do too, just to see ourselves more in a larger context. Like I would imagine the people on the streets in Minneapolis are now seeing each other. Mm-hmm. They're seeing each other with a common purpose, not what do you have, what's the color of your skin, but we are fighting together for what's right. So that's kind of how I see it for now.
Excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So as I mentioned, I wanted us to go back and revisit the principles of Kwanzaa simply because I see them as a blueprint for everything that we're talking about, as a blueprint for collective agency, right? And so I'm just going to go through the list. I'm not going to speed through it, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time. It's just to get those high points and really begin to see how these things all interconnected together for collective agency. So let's start with unity. Unity is about emotional infrastructure and a daily ethic. So unity is relational alignment. We choose connection even when we disagree or when we recognize that our liberation is interdependent. So from a reimagine me perspective, what I'd like all three of us to do is kind of answer these questions as we go through very briefly, but I want to get an answer to the questions for our audience. So under unity, the question is, how can I stay in relationship even when I am in disagreement? So I'd be willing to bet that each one of us on this show, as well as listeners, can remember a particular time when you're in relationship, a very strong, good, solid, rock solid relationship, but you're also in disagreement. And so for me, when I found myself in those types of situations, the main thing that I've tried to keep in mind is a difference in perspective. Right? Because each one of us comes into whatever that conversation is from the perspective of our experiences. And so I have to remind myself that this particular disagreement isn't necessarily related to anything that could be either detrimental to me or detrimental to the other person. Sometimes it's just a matter of a different perspective. So it's that old saying, we can agree to disagree. So Mavis, Gail, how do you answer that question very quickly?
Gail, go. I'm not great at that, I gotta say.
Well, I mean, certainly if you've ever been in a relationship, you want to find a way to be able to accept the other's differences, just as you want to have your differences accepted. And to find somebody that has exactly every single thing about them is about the same thing about you would probably be very boring. So we don't do that usually. And so it's kind of looking at the collective, and whether it's in a partner relationship, whether it's in a group or a community or much larger, we have to be willing to sit back and listen to the other and respect that they have a right to their perspective, as I have a right to my perspective. And so I can be able to do that and disagree with a person and not abandon the belief of the collective or the purpose of the goals of the collective.
Yes, yes. Mavis?
I guess my tact usually is to ask questions so I can understand,
Mm-hmm.
even if it is a different perspective. I just want to understand because there are so many things I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the second Kwanzaa principle is self-determination. And self-determination is defined as an act of freedom. So the question is, what identity or belief do I need to release in order to live more freely? And so for me, I can say that when I first stepped into corporate America, because I went from working in a university environment into a corporate environment. And so I had to kind of come to terms with, am I going to assimilate into this environment? Or what are some things that I have to do in order to assimilate into this environment? But once I got there, I came to the conclusion that I don't want to assimilate. What I want is to be able to walk into this environment and be fully who I am. So for me, that was an act of freedom to release myself from this belief or this identity that maybe I have to assimilate in this environment, because assimilation always involves you giving up something of yourself.
Yeah, I'll add there. I would like to give up fear of judgment of others and to stick to my own boundaries, without feeling pushed around. I mean, that's related in ways to assimilation. Every corporate environment has its own culture, and you feel kind of pressed into that culture. So for me, in any group, it would be getting rid of the fear of judgment and minding my boundaries.
Excellent. I can agree with that.
I think for me, it's similar to what you were saying, that I would not want to lose that I am of who I am, and that, right? I can listen to somebody else. I can hear it from their perspective, what they feel and how and why they feel it. And I can still also say, this is where I am or what I believe. And so I've worked really hard to let go of that fear of others' judgments and that fear that I don't have a right to, or I don't know what I say isn't going to matter, and all the different insecurities that can come with that. So that I can sit here now and say, yeah, I do matter. And my thoughts and feelings do, and so do yours. And we all do. So I can come from very different perspectives. And
Excellent, excellent. I like this. Okay, so the next one is collective work and responsibility, and that is about shared stewardship. It's about framing responsibility as love in action and not blame. So the question is, where am I willing to take responsibility for the collective well-being of my community? So I'm going to answer that question by, again, when I go back to when I first came back to Pittsburgh. So I lived in this sort of New Jersey and all of that for almost 30 years. But when I came back to Pittsburgh, one of the things that I realized is that I had no business contacts here. I didn't really have any long-term connections anymore because I didn't live here for almost 30 years. And so what I ended up doing was I have to figure out how can I connect in community. And so one of the places that I ended up connecting in community is Gail's organization called OMA. That was like one of the very first organizations, community-based. And then from there, I just kind of blossomed in terms of being a part of a community and that collective well-being and the Ujamaa Collective and all of that, which is my community as well. And so coming to the realization that I needed to make these connections, and then I started doing them, and I started primarily looking at nonprofits, in that kind of community in that space and all of that. So that was very helpful for me to kind of bridge that gap of not really knowing a lot of people in the city of Pittsburgh.
You want to go, Gail, or I've got an idea here.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
It makes me think of something that happened today, where I'm willing to take responsibility in a local sense, and certainly it can be expanded, but it's to know my neighbors and to watch and care for them. The police came to my house the other night because someone down the road noticed that a friend of mine, her car was covered with snow and it hadn't moved in days. And the neighborhood was worried that something was wrong in the house. And so there were a chain of probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 people that talked about this. And then the police finally found my name and asked me. And I just found that so connecting, that people cared, that people raised that issue. And knowing each other and protecting each other, I'm definitely willing to take responsibility for.
Wonderful, wonderful. So the next one is cooperative economics, and this is wealth as shared capacity. And so on the one hand, we have capitalism, and capitalism says win and accumulate at someone else's loss, that whole idea of extracting and all of that. But then cooperation says circulate, reciprocate, and sufficiency for all. And so the Reimagine We question is, how can I use my resources to increase collective well-being rather than individual advantage? Again, for me, the answer became Ujamaa, especially now, given the space that I'm working in now. Ujamaa Collective is what feeds me in terms of being in those collective spaces. We do so much work in the community, and it's so incredibly gratifying for me. So I'll pass the baton to either Mavis or Gail for your response.
Gail, you ready?
Yeah, I could talk about OMA, the nonprofit that I'm president of the board of, is a community, and we've extended it to larger communities. With the internet, and even during the pandemic, we were able to extend it beyond even southwestern Pennsylvania. And we had people from Australia checking in and attending some of the programs that we had. And so it was about, for me, it was about giving, not just so I could get some, but most of all, it was giving so others could also experience what I believed was really very crucial and important in us all being able to maintain a level of connection and growth and healing.
Great. Wonderful, wonderful. So now let's talk about purpose, and talk about purpose as vocation in service of liberation. So purpose is the bridge between self-determination and outward action. And it orients the work towards what we are creating and not just what we are resisting. So it's one thing to talk about we want to resist these extractive systems and we want to resist capitalism and all of that. But what are we creating in place of that? So that the creation part is just as important as the resistance part. And so the Reimagine Me question here is, how does my life contribute to the world I want future generations to inherit? So for me, when I think about that question, I immediately think about Cairo. And that original question that we asked, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that a little bit later, but just this whole idea of doing something in your life that contributes to something that future generations can benefit from? When I think about my mom and the work that she did, here I am now following in her footsteps. So there was work that she did that benefited me. And so now it's my turn to do work that's going to benefit a future generation, not just my grandson Cairo, but future generations in general. And so that's part of my existence, is having this purpose that says I'm adding and I'm adding and I'm adding and I'm contributing.
Yeah. My answer to that question would be my time, excuse me, and my experience. I contribute, I donate. I want people to see that with all the trouble in the world, don't tell yourself you can't do anything, because every small act makes a difference. And I would love for people to more and more raise that to the top of their goals, instead of how much money they make or what material goods they have, but what is the legacy of my life?
Mavis, I'm sorry, Gail.
First thing that comes to my mind is that I teach kindness and love of self and other, right? And always being able to be present and to focus on the listening, not just the expression. But it's also about our basic birthrights that we all have, and respecting those birthrights. And so opening up the belief that we all have the ability to heal if we can access a path that is going to facilitate and help us find that way to do that. But there is always a way. And so I want the future generations to know that hopefully they are in a better place than we all are. And their healing process won't have to be as extensive. But what I believe is, if each of us, even just are kind to every person we interact with, that makes a big difference, I think, in everything from a larger standpoint.
Yeah.
Kindness and respect.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So the next Kwanzaa principle is creativity. And I like the way it defines creativity as tools of world building. So whether we're talking art or we're talking storytelling, we're talking music, design, or rituals, they are all tools of world building that enable us to design new possibilities rather than accepting inherited structures. So our creativity is what we have as a tool to build a different kind of world. Right? And so the question is, what am I creating that expands freedom, beauty, or possibility for others? So I'm not going to answer first. This time I'm going to go straight to Mavis and Gail, and then I'll come back to my answer.
I just want to quote Angela Davis again. She says, creating is a perpetual force of resistance. I love the idea of that. I mean, it's so succinct, but my whole life I have been consuming the creativity of the Black community through music and art and friendship. And it's just gorgeous. It's powerful. It's part of me now. Let's see, what am I creating that expands freedom? Well, I would refer back to my nonprofit in Rwanda, which is about feeding and educating young people who were either generationally or directly affected by the 1994 genocide. I believe that if they have a chance to eat, grow up, and be educated, they will make different decisions and lead their country in a different way. So that's what I'm creating for.
Excellent.
I I think in my professional work, as I said before, I think I every day I help people look within themselves to find and remember that truth of who they are, that they came here to be underneath all those imprints that we all get, and to really ground themselves in that truth and to choose to be that. We can just show up and be really, truly who we are. But it's knowing that and then experiencing that. So I think I do that in a lot of different creative ways, but and then certainly OMA is an extension of that on a larger scale. And I think the podcast is also part of that too. And helping people learn and grow and look within themselves and see where they can also choose to create a different path.
Excellent, excellent. So I like the idea of creating in such a way that expands people's freedom and expands the possibilities that they could have in their life. And I think that's one of the reasons why I went into becoming a life coach. Or even when I was in corporate America, when I made the shift from being in the lab into being in the learning and development role, it was really important for me to understand, now that I'm in this completely different role. I was the scientist with the goggles and the lab coat, and all of a sudden I'm, trying to figure out how to teach people how to communicate and all of that. And one of the things that I did very early on was recognizing the fact that within the company, there was a relatively significant portion of the R&D scientists who were Asian, right? So English is not their first language. And when I came into that new role, one of the things that I understood very early on is the fact that that community was in a dire need for English language development training and learning. And so that was the very, very first program that I implemented in the company, was this English language development program, right? And one of the things that I remember about that is once the program got underway, the response that I got from the people was amazing to me. Thank you. We've been looking for something like this for years. And so it felt good to me that I expanded possibility, because that language barrier was also something that was impacting their ability to get promoted and different things like that. So that language barrier carried multiple implications. And I felt like in that moment of making that decision and putting it forth, I had to go before the senior VP of the R&D organization to get it approved and all of that. But I felt like it was something that was truly needed. And so when it was implemented, and the response that I got back was very, very gratifying for me. So we're going to finish out the last one, which is faith, and then we're going to take a quick break. And faith is that courageous hope that is grounded in action. So it's not just, oh, I'm hoping. It's grounded, and it's a way of bringing about action, either in yourself or in other people. So faith is what sustains us when systems are unjust and outcomes are uncertain, and it fuels our long-term commitment rather than short-term burnout. So we don't want to be in that place of burning out, right? So the Reimagine We question is, we're going to have to go through this a little bit quicker. What am I willing to trust into being even when I cannot yet see the results? So for me, the answer is still related to my grandson. When I talk about grandson, I'm really talking about young people. I'm talking about that younger generation. And what am I doing that's going to make it even better for them, despite all of the stuff that's going on? How can I pour into young people or adults or just other people in general that gives them a sense of hope that is grounded in action, that I am taking that action that can give them a stronger sense of help? Mavis, Gail, your response quickly?
I'll be quick. Well, I'm a person of faith. I believe that God is still on his throne, no matter what's going on in the world. And there's a lot I'm believing for that I won't see the results of. But I quote Angela Davis again, hope is a discipline, not a strategy.
That's right.
It doesn't have a beginning and an end. It's a discipline.
That's beautiful.
Right. It's being able to come from that place within each of us, right? That you can attach to that and know that we can choose. And for me, I've always been taught lessons around faith and believe that, and I still believe that we have the capacity as in a collective humanity to be able to create what has always been intended.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Are you passionate about impacting social change or working towards anti-racism as a society? Are you willing to deconstruct your innermost thoughts, ideas, and beliefs about racism? Then Inflection Point Podcast, Cultivating Change from the Inside Out, is the show for you. Join Anita Russell, Mavis Bauman, and Gail Hunter in open, honest, and deliberate conversations every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, only on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Pat. I'm the host of the Dr. Pat Show, and I am the creator of the Transformation Network, doing what we do in the world of positive radio, informed, educated, positive media. Independent radio hosts and independent networks have been the face of positive messaging over the past decade. So all of us here have decided we're going to put together an independent network that is going to enable people to bring their positive message of hope, inspiration, and conscious action to the forefront. Help us create a future of amazing, uplifting stories that can be told so we can tell our children and they can tell their children of what hope and conscious action is all about.
I want to thank you all for tuning us in, turning us on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Do you want to become a host? Start your own podcast to inspire, persuade, and influence others on what you're passionate about? At the Transformation Network, we can help make your talk radio dreams happen. Let's take your hopes, dreams, and passions and put them on air today. Email us at host@transformationtalkradio.com to learn more about becoming a host of your very own show.
Back to Inflection Point Podcast as we begin our 2026 journey. Reimagine We begins with Reimagine Me. So far in this episode, we have discussed the Kwanzaa principles as a blueprint for collective liberation. So at this point, we're going to kind of switch up the conversation a bit. And you've heard me mention this little boy named Cairo, and we're going to go back and revisit the Cairo question. So when I think about the Cairo question and I think about where we are now, all the things that have happened since the Cairo question, the inception, I should say, of the Cairo question, Reimagine We now is the manifestation of the answer to the Cairo question. I see it as a collective practice that are grounded in the understanding that dismantling racism and dehumanization extends far beyond laws and legislations and politics and economics. It is an inside job where personal accountability and that worldview, each one of us has our own personal worldview, and it also shapes how we show up in the world, right? So I'm going to just kind of talk about the Cairo question. The Cairo question evolved after the murder of George Floyd, right? So this is sort of my evolution and my shift from anti-racism to where I am now, and more in this space of Black empowerment and prosperity and joy, to quote Dr. Livingston. So the murder of George Floyd is what kind of kicked everything off with all of this. The Cairo question evolved from a family discussion where my daughters, two of my daughters, were going out to participate in a Black Lives Matter protest. And the little boy Cairo that I referred to at the time, he was only 4 months old, about 3 or 4 months old. And so we're having this conversation about, protesting and kind of looking at the reality is, when I think about my family, my mom was a protester, I became a protester, and now my daughters were going out and protesting. And this was 3 generations. We realized that this is 3 generations of us doing the same thing and protesting over the same types of things. And so the question came up as we're looking at Cairo, 4 months, is he going to have to protest in his lifetime as well for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born, right? And so that's how that question came into being. And after the murder of George Floyd, and we started thinking about this podcast, the podcast launched in 2021, right? And one of the things that became really important to me is, or one of the individuals, I should say, is Dr. Robert Livingston he's a Harvard University professor, and he has been, or his books, his writing and his research and everything has been very instrumental in how I was able to conceptualize Inflection Point podcast. And it started off with a book called The Conversation: How Seeking and Speaking the Truth About Racism Can Radically Transform Individuals and Organizations. So in the beginning, Inflection Point podcast was really all about anti-racism. How do we talk? How do we have these conversations? What are the educational tools we need to have? I ended up creating an anti-racism incubator and all of these different things that were happening. And then 2024 came, and the election in 2024. And we've had conversations, Mavis Gill and I, about what that felt like for me. And it felt like the boulder just rolled down the hill all over again. DEI started to disappear. History started to disappear. When I mean that more in terms of education and books and book bannings and all of this stuff that started to happen. And I really felt like we just rolled all the way back down the hill all over again. And I had been feeling that way. And then Dr. Livingston wrote another book. And this book was called Play the Game, Change the Game, or Leave the Game. And he was talking about pathways to Black empowerment, prosperity, and joy. Once I read that book, it just kind of reinvigorated me, because it took me out of that space of loss, because I felt like I lost something. But it took me out of that space, and now I'm in a different kind of space. And out of that, my reading that book, that's where Reimagine We begins, with Reimagine Me. That's where it came from. And so this whole idea of reimagining, but reimagining through the lens of Black empowerment, Black prosperity, and Black joy. Because I want my people to be strong. I want my grandson to be strong. And all those little boys and all those little girls that go to Susulu Walker Charter School, I want them to be strong. Because they're going to have to resist the same way that we're resisting. And so we have to teach them. We have to empower them. So the answer to the question is yes, he will have to protest and resist in his lifetime. And the primary role of his family, Cairo's family, is to educate him and empower him as he grows. So that has been my evolution in that movement from anti-racism, having the conversations, into doing something very different and moving much more into this space of empowerment for my community. Mavis, Gail, would you like to share your evolution?
I'll give it a try. When George Floyd was murdered, something snapped in me. I think much of the world, something snapped, because this was on tape. This wasn't a matter of perspective. It happened before our eyes. And even though I was pretty much connected to, I'm afraid of saying it the wrong way, I have a lot of friends in the Black community. There's so much I didn't know about what Black people face on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. So this podcast alone and studying for it every month has been like a college course for me, where I've learned just how deep and broad the issue of racism is, how systemic it is, how injurious it is to everyone. And I guess it's just that I'm on this growth curve of trying to understand it even more deeply. I mean, I want to understand it as fully as I can, but as a white woman, I don't know I'll ever get there like I would like to. But I can be a source of support, peace, solidarity, and I know that I will work on this for the rest of my life. I mentioned earlier about my hope crashing, as Livingston brought up in his book, and certainly with the election and seeing DEI and affirmative action get squashed. I don't feel any differently about how Black people should be treated in this world. They can take away all those laws. I'm going to behave in a progressive way. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Mavis. Gail?
Well, I mean, certainly my work in humanity, let's say, and people, and being able to work with people who have experienced trauma and so forth. Black people have experienced trauma forever, right? Since white people brought them over here, and what and it's still happening. And so my hope is that all racism certainly grows beyond what the reality of that experience has been, into a place of absolute truth, that every person knows that absolute truth within themselves, and they live that truth, and that that you can learn all you want to from the education, the history, but you also have to experience being with people that are of a different color than you if you are white. And really trying to get to know them and get to understand and listen and be open, because we all are here, and this isn't okay how so many people have been treated. It's abusive, it's trauma inducing. I mean, it's just appalling to me in many, many ways. So to work on empowerment for Black people, self-empowerment, I think we all need to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. We cannot change or make any changes without empowering ourselves to be able to ground ourselves and finding out what that absolute truth is and living by that every single moment, whatever that is being presented to us, and not backing down from that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gail, both of you.
I have one other little thought.
Sure.
I listened to a sermon today from the National Cathedral, and of course, she was addressing Black History Month, and she referenced the 1976 film Network, where the guy's name is Howard Beale. He's so frustrated with what's going on in the world that he says, I'm going to yell out the window, I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And when he does that, he opens his window in New York and yells, and there are hundreds, thousands of people yelling out their windows. I would like to see our population get mad as hell about racism, about oppression, about extraction, about suffering, about starving, everything, and not put up with it anymore.
Excellent.
Zero tolerance.
Zero
I
tolerance.
tell people who are victims of abuse to have a zero tolerance for anybody that is abusing you in any way.
Yeah.
And we all have to have a zero tolerance for that.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you all for sharing that. So this last segment is this idea that Reimagine We is about living Black history. It's not about nostalgia. It's about continuation. For me personally, it's about continuation, because Black history isn't something that's behind me. It's being written every day through how we imagine community, how we imagine power, how do we imagine faith, how do we imagine economics, how do we imagine all of this stuff together? And there's tension in that, because history is often frozen into dates and incidents and heroes, while the collective imagination that sustains survival is ignored. Like, it's amazing to me that Black people are where we are in spite of slavery, in spite of lynchings, in spite of our communities being destroyed. We're still here, and we're standing strong. And I feel like we're standing stronger today I just feel like we're standing stronger today because there's so much that's out in the open now. There's no excuse for people not to know and understand the experiences of Black people in this country. Just about everything that you read in the Constitution, the independent, the Declaration of Independence, all of these things had an underlying impact on Black people. No matter how you look at it, going all the way back. All men are created equal. That didn't apply to us. When you think about all the other boulders that have rolled back down the hill over the course of history, Reconstruction, it just rolled right back down. Black codes and all of these laws after so-called emancipation, it just got recreated into incarceration. Now you got laws on the books for ridiculous things. My existence, my very existence almost became against the law in America. But yet we're still here. That's the amazing part. We're still here and we're still standing, and I stand in empowerment and reimagining a future for my grandson to be whole, to be filled with joy, to be empowered, to be prosperous, all of these things. And when I think about it again through the historical lens, Black survival has always been collective in design. We've always worked this way. Reimagine We names what our ancestors practiced instinctively: interdependence with dignity. That's what I want to see. That's what I want to see. So everything that we're experiencing right now, in one way or another, I can connect back to the early days of colonization, stealing land, enslaving people, brutalizing people. When I look at ICE today, slave patrols. That's what they are. They're the remnant of slave patrols. So, for our listeners, I want you to think about, what does it look like to practice Black history? Because practicing Black history is akin to practicing American history, because you cannot really look at, appreciate, recognize, or experience American history if you don't look at Black history. You just can't do it. People try to do it,
Okay.
but you can't.
It's all part of it.
So your thoughts at this point?
I think it's time that everyone looks within themselves to really ask themselves, what is that absolute truth? It's like saying all men are created equal. Well, it didn't include women, it didn't include Black people, it didn't include children, and yet it needs to, because that is the absolute truth. That we all, whatever color skin color you have, we all really are created equal, and we all deserve kindness and respect. Yeah, that's what creates dignity. That's truth.
I've been thinking about the word solidarity, and what it means for white people to stand in solidarity with any oppressed group, especially Black folks, as we're talking about right now in Black History Month. I just read a brief article about James Swerg, who was a freedom writer in the 60s, a white guy who put his life on the line. And the article closed with this sentence: solidarity has a cost, and the cost is the point. You know, months ago, we talked about white people to the front, you know. Are you going to stand in front of are you willing to stand in front of a Black crowd who is protesting and protect them? And I want to know that I can do that. I want to know that I am sufficiently, or at least certainly more, standing in solidarity and willing to pay that cost.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
So again, I encourage our listeners to think about, how do I practice Black history? And one of the things is like this idea of shifting from these great individuals, you know, this individual who did this thing. But really, when you think about it, it's shared genius across all of these centuries of history in the United States. It was not just one group of people that did all these great and amazing things. Right? Engage in conversations that are rooted in empowerment and prosperity and joy. Reflect on how your choices can honor community legacy. And I'd like to leave you with this. We just have about 3 more minutes to go. I want to leave you with this unifying message. Mavis had been quoting Dr. Angela Davis quite a bit, and she is like absolutely one of my favorite people ever, right? Excuse me. So I leave you with this unifying message from Dr. Angela Davis. And this was an interview that Dr. Robert Livingston had done in his book, Play the Game, Change the Game, Leave the Game, Black Empowerment, Prosperity, and Joy. And this is what she said. So that every profound sense of collective identity has remained in me throughout my life. I suppose that's a way of answering that question by saying that I've survived precisely because my identity is very much inflected with the work and the consciousness of others. I've never felt weak, even when we were not able to win, because I've never felt entirely alone. And of course, because of the fact that my life was saved, literally by millions of people coming together all over the world, that's a more explicit example of that sense of my connectedness with others. So reimagine we is to remember that Black history has always been future facing. And we invite our listeners to carry that legacy forward intentionally and boldly and collectively. So I challenge our listeners with this question. Which Kwanzaa principles do you resonate with most in your life? And how does history inform how you live, lead, work, spend, worship, and care today? So I ask these questions because transformation is not something that we join or simply experience. It's something that we become. So I'd like to thank you all for being here and listening. We are Inflection Point Podcast on Transformation Talk Radio, and we are here every first and third Wednesday of the month, Mavis, Gail, and I. So I invite you into our conversations for this year to reimagine we, beginning with Reimagine Me. So we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.